Mga Angeles, you're watching Eagle News International on tonight's headlines. Russian President Vladimir Putin launches an attack on Ukraine with explosions heard across the country, and its foreign minister warns a full-scale invasion is underway. Hong Kong's government invokes emergency powers to allow doctors, nurses, and other personnel from the Chinese mainland to help combat a spiraling coronavirus outbreak. Hundreds of truckers and their supporters set off from Southern California on a convoy headed across the U.S. towards the capital, Washington, to protest against pandemic restrictions. And Church of Christ members in the picturesque island nation of the Maldives held a coastal cleanup drive. First in our news, Russian President Vladimir Putin launched an air and ground assault on Ukraine today, forcing residents to flee for their lives and leaving at least 5 Ukrainian soldiers already dead. He announced a military operation in eastern Ukraine just as the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres was speaking at the emergency session of the United Nations Security Council, urging him to give peace a chance. The late-night televised address from President Putin came shortly after self-proclaimed separatist leaders in eastern Ukraine asking him to, quote, help them repel Ukraine's aggression. It's the latest culmination in a series of escalations that began on Monday when President Putin recognized the independence of the 2 regions in eastern Ukraine, including territory controlled by Kiev. Let's listen in.
Уважаемые товарищи, ваши отцы, деды и прадеды не для того сражались с нацистами, защищая нашу общую родину, чтобы сегодняшние неонацисты захватили власть на Украине. Вы давали присягу на верность украинскому народу, а не антинародной хунте, которая грабит Украину и издевается над этим самым народом. Не исполняйте ее преступных приказов. Призываю вас немедленно сложить оружие и идти домой. Мною принято решение о проведении специальной военной операции. Кто бы ни пытался помешать нам, а тем более создать угрозы для нашей страны, для нашего народа, должны знать, что ответ России будет незамедлительным и приведет вас к таким последствиям, с которыми вы в своей истории еще никогда не сталкивались.
Sirens were heard in Ukraine. Frightened Ukrainians took to subway stations as air raid sirens rang out across the country's main cities following Russia's launch of its feared military attack. Many in the city of 3 million people woke up to a series of terrifying booms echoing somewhere in the distance in the deep of the night. An AFP reporter in Kiev, Ukraine's capital, heard explosions within about 30 minutes of President Putin's announcement. Explosions were also heard in the eastern city of Mariupol and the Black Sea port of Odessa, according to AFP reporters. In response, Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky made an emotional late-night appeal to Russians not to support a major war in Europe. Speaking Russian, Zelensky said that the people of Russia are being lied to about Ukraine and that the possibility of war also depends on you.
Кто может этого не допустить? Люди. Если эти люди среди вас, уверен, нужно остановиться, пока не поздно. И если руководство России не хочет ради мира садиться за стол с нами, возможно, оно сядет за стол с вами. Хотят ли русские войны? Я очень хотел бы ответить на этот вопрос, но ответ зависит.
Ukraine has around 200,000 military personnel, and Wednesday's call-up could see up to 250,000 reservists aged between 80 and 60 receive their mobilization papers. Moscow's total forces are much larger, around 1 million active duty personnel, and they have been modernized and rearmed in recent years. But Ukraine has received advanced anti-tank weapons and some drones from NATO members. More have been promised as the allies try to deter a Russian attack or at least make it costly. Shelling has intensified in recent days between Ukrainian forces and Russian-backed separatists. A Ukrainian soldier was killed on Wednesday, the 6th in 4 days, and civilians living near the front are fearful. Russia has long demanded that Ukraine be forbidden from ever joining the NATO alliance and that the U.S. troops pull out from Eastern Europe. Speaking to journalists, President Putin on Tuesday set out a number of stringent conditions if the West wanted to de-escalate the crisis, saying Ukraine should drop its NATO ambition and become neutral. Washington on Wednesday announced sanctions on the Nord Stream 2 gas pipeline, which Germany had earlier effectively suspended by halting certification. Australia, Britain, Japan, and the European Union have also announced sanctions. Meanwhile, world leaders today swiftly condemned Russia's military attack on Ukraine, with Western capitals vowing to escalate sanctions against Moscow, while the head of the United Nations demanded the conflict end immediately. Take a look.
今回のロシアによる侵攻は力による一方的な現状変更を認めないとの国際秩序の根幹を揺るがすものであり、ロシアを強く非難するとともに、米国をはじめとする国際社会と連携して迅速に対処してまいります。
Our world is facing a moment of peril. I truly hoped it would not come.
In the recent past, there were several situations with similar indications, similar rumors. And I never believed in them, convinced that nothing serious would happen. I was wrong. And I would like not to be wrong again today. President Putin, stop your troops from attacking the Ukraine. Give peace a chance. Too many people have already died.
This conflict must stop now. What is clear for me is that this war doesn't make any sense. It violates the principles of the Charter, and it causes, or will cause, if it doesn't stop, a level of suffering Europe has not known since at least the volcanic crisis.
Early this morning, Russian troops invaded Ukraine, a free and sovereign country. And once again, in the center of Europe, innocent women, men and children are dying of fear for their lives. We condemn this barbaric attack and the cynical arguments to justify it. It is President Putin who is bringing war back to Europe. And in these dark hours, the European Union and its people stand by Ukraine and its people.
The European Union will respond in the strongest possible terms. President of the European Council, President Michel, has called for a meeting of the European Council this evening, and they will agree and provide political guidance to adopt the stronger package, the harshest package of sanctions we have ever implemented. This is not a question of blocks. This is not a question of diplomatic power games. It's a matter of life and death. It's about the future of our global community.
Meanwhile, French President Emmanuel Macron said Russia must immediately put an end to its military operations. He wrote on Twitter, saying Russia had made a decision to wage war on Ukraine. France stands in solidarity with Ukraine. It stands by Ukrainians and is working with its partners and allies to end the war. Now, an excuse for the military operation was given on Wednesday when the Kremlin said the separatist leaders of Donetsk and Lugansk had sent letters to President Putin asking him to help them repel Ukraine's aggression. And their reported appeals came after President Putin recognized their independence and signed friendship treaties with them that include defense deals. Now, Western nations said ahead of Thursday's operation, Russia had already amassed 150,000 troops in combat formations on Ukraine's borders with Russia, Belarus, and Russian-occupied Crimea on warships in the Black Sea. Ukraine has around 200,000 military personnel and could boost that with up to 250,000 reservists. Moscow's total forces are much larger, around 1 million active duty personnel, and have been modernized and rearmed in recent years. But Ukraine has received anti-tank weapons, also some drones from NATO members. More have been promised as the allies try to deter Russian attacks. Meanwhile, Australia, too, hit Russia with a second phase of sanctions today over its assault on Ukraine. The first salvo in an expected battery of new international measures to punish Moscow. Prime Minister Scott Morrison condemned Russia's illegal invasion as he announced sanctions against 25 individuals, 4 entities involved in developing and selling military gear, and restrictions on 4 financial institutions. Let's listen in.
The Russian government launched a brutal invasion, unprovoked, on Ukraine and should be condemned for doing so, and Australia does. We do call on the Russian government to withdraw and return Ukraine to a peaceful situation. We denounce what are unilateral hostile actions in Ukraine. Russia is flagrantly breaching international law and the UN Charter. Russia has chosen war. We are now progressing the second phase of those financial sanctions. The Acting Minister of Foreign Affairs, Senator Birmingham, has completed the process of applying sanctions to an additional 25 persons. This includes army commanders, deputy defence ministers and Russian mercenaries who have been responsible for the unprovoked and unacceptable aggression, and 4 entities involved in the development and sale of military technology and weapons. We must ensure there is a cost for this violent, unacceptable and egregious behaviour.
A conflict in Ukraine will not only threaten Europe's energy supplies, but could also indirectly hit U.S. energy markets and prices. That is according to Jonathan Elkind, a senior research scholar at Columbia University Center for Global Energy Policy and a former energy official in the Clinton and Obama administrations. Again, let's listen in.
Russia plays an important part in global energy markets, and particularly in oil and natural gas. But Russia's direct impact on the U.S. energy economy is quite limited. The chief means of impact would be through rising global prices, and that would require the withdrawal from production of a certain share of global of Russia's oil production. Well, the biggest point about the potential energy-related impacts on the United States comes from the fact that most of the conventional energy markets are in fact global markets. So if you were to see a reduction in Russian exports of oil, that has an impact on the global marketplace. If Russia diminishes or cuts its deliveries of natural gas into Europe, there will be a market response to that. That market response will come in the form of higher prices for shipments of LNG. That, in turn, can have an impact on the price of natural gas by pipe inside of the continental U.S. One has seen energy price rises sustained through a long period. So you're starting from a period of elevated prices, and you could be seeing more of them. So yes, that may translate into additional inflationary impact in the U.S. economy. Russia appears to have spent a considerable amount of the last decade or more investing itself in cyber warfare capabilities that do affect, potentially, the U.S. economy.
Meanwhile, oil surged past $105 per barrel, and equities tumbled today after key crude producer Russia sent forces into Ukraine, accelerating fears of a major war in Eastern Europe. Asian and European stock markets nosedived, with Frankfurt and Paris shedding 5% as investors fled risky equities, while haven investment gold rebounded close to $2,000 per ounce. After weeks of warnings from the U.S. and other powers, Russian President Putin ordered a wide-ranging offensive into its neighbors, sparking fury from other world leaders and vows to ramp up sanctions on Moscow. In reaction, oil rocketed more than 8%, with European benchmark Brent prices briefly cruising past $105 per barrel for the first time since 2014, while aluminum and wheat surged to record peaks on fears over output from major exporter Russia. Meanwhile, people were seen outside a metro station in Kiev with luggage and personal belongings. When asked by an AFP reporter why they came to the station, a Ukrainian resident says it's to save our lives. Let's listen in.
Why do you go to the metro?
Because Russian Federation starts the war in Ukraine.
So what do you want to do?
Save our life.
And what is there inside?
We hope that it saves us, because metro, it's on the ground, it's save us.
And here, what is it?
Here tower.
Meanwhile, 18 people died Thursday in an airstrike on a military airbase near Ukraine's Black Sea port city of Odessa, according to the local administration. And this attack came on the first day of an invasion of Ukraine that President Vladimir Putin launched after sparring for weeks with the West about NATO's presence in Eastern Europe. It was the deadliest single strike so far of the day, reported by Ukrainian officials, who had earlier put the death toll across the country at around 50, including about 10 civilians. The attack struck a military base about 100 kilometers north of Odessa in a region near Ukraine's border with Moldova. Meanwhile, a far-right presidential candidate in France, Eric Zemmour, said they have unfortunately done nothing to avoid this escalation, referring to the West after the invasion of Ukraine by Russia. He denounced the uninterrupted expansion of NATO in the east of the continent and the non-implementation of the Minsk agreements. Let's listen in.
Nous aurions pu éviter cette catastrophe. Je répète depuis des années que les Occidentaux ont une responsabilité dans l'escalade de la violence à l'Est et qu'ils doivent comprendre les revendications russes contre l'expansion de l'OTAN. Nous n'avons hélas rien fait pour éviter cette escalade. Je dis nous car nous sommes tous responsables. Les Russes, bien sûr, et ce matin, ils sont les premiers responsables. Mais les Occidentaux aussi depuis des années, avec l'expansion ininterrompue de l'OTAN à l'est du continent et la non-application des accords de Minsk.
NATO will hold a virtual summit on Friday on Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Diplomats told AFP as the alliance announced after an emergency meeting that additional steps were being taken to protect member countries. The developments were announced after an emergency meeting of ambassadors of NATO's 30 member states hours after Russia carried out air and missile strikes on Ukraine and sent in tanks and soldiers. In its statement, NATO condemned in the strongest possible terms Russia's horrifying attack on Ukraine, which is entirely unjustified and unprovoked, and a violation of international law and Moscow's commitments. It said Russia's actions pose a threat to Euro-Atlantic security and that they will have geostrategic consequences. It also condemned Russian ally Belarus for enabling this attack. While Ukraine is not a NATO member, it is a partner country. The alliance has repeatedly said it will not send combat troops to Ukraine to help defend it from Russia, but some NATO countries have been sending its weapons and ammunition, and it has deployed extra forces to neighboring NATO countries. Meanwhile, the Russian army said that Moscow-backed separatist forces in eastern Ukraine were already advancing and had gained territory after the Kremlin launched an attack on the country. Let's listen in.
Войск Донецкой Народной Республики, наступая на Волноваху, продвинулась до 3 километров, а группировка Луганской Народной Республики, наступая в направлении населенного пункта Счастье, форсировала Северский Донец и продвинулась на 1,5 километра. Сейчас группировки войск ДНР и ЛНР ведут бои и наносят огневое поражение противнику. Подразделения Вооруженных сил Украины продолжают обстрелы мирных городов Донбасса. Есть жертвы среди гражданского населения Донецкой и Луганской народных республик.
Military spokesman Igor Konashenkov was telling state television that forces of the Donetsk People's Republic gained up to 3 kilometers in territory, and those of the Lugansk People's Republic advanced 1.5 kilometers. He added that Russia had high-precision weapons and that Ukrainian civilians had nothing to fear. Konashenkov also said the Russia-backed rebel troops are now fighting and inflicting damage on the enemy. Konashenkov, or Russian President Vladimir Putin, announced he was launching an offensive on Ukraine in the early hours of Thursday, and he did. He did so far after recognizing the 2 rebel republics in eastern Ukraine and signing friendship treaties with them. And here's NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg saying the alliance is activating defense plans for its allies after Russia launched an invasion of Ukraine, following weeks of sparring with the West about NATO's presence in Eastern Europe. Take a look.
Today, the North Atlantic Council decided to activate our defense plans at request of our top military commander, General Todd Walters. This is a prudent and defensive step to protect and shield allied nations during this crisis. And it will enable us to deploy capabilities and forces, including the NATO response force, to where they are needed.
Now, Stoltenberg did not give details of them beyond saying they are defensive plans, allowing deployments that cover the whole east of the alliance and which give their military commanders some more authority within politically defined guidelines, unquote. He also said it would include elements of NATO's Rapid Reaction Force of 40,000 soldiers, including a highly prepared unit of 7,000 personnel, most of them French, and an air wing under French command. Stoltenberg said Friday's summit would also include non-NATO members Sweden and Finland, and EU chiefs Ursula von der Leyen and Charles Michel. The NATO chief said the invasion would have long-term effects on the Western Alliance's relationship with Russia and NATO's security posture. And coming up, Hong Kong's government invoked emergency powers to allow doctors, nurses, and other personnel from the Chinese mainland to help combat a spiraling coronavirus outbreak. And Cyclone Etna has lashed the island nation of Madagascar, still reeling from the impact of another cyclone earlier this month. That and more when Eagle News International comes back. Welcome back. First to the UK, Queen Elizabeth II has cancelled engagements after she tested positive for COVID. Here's Ryan Florentino joining us live from our London bureau to give us the details. Ryan.
Hello, and yes, Queen Elizabeth II on Wednesday held her weekly telephone audience with British Prime Minister Boris Johnson despite having mild COVID symptoms, Buckingham Palace said. Her Majesty did speak to the Prime Minister this evening. A spokesman said after the 95-year-old monarch on Tuesday cancelled her planned virtual engagements because of COVID. The Queen and the Prime Minister have held weekly audiences by telephone for much of the pandemic, and they are expected to have discussed the escalating crisis with Russia on Ukraine's border. The head of the state tested positive for the virus on Sunday, sparking renewed concerns about her health after she spent a night in hospital in October last year. She was forced to rest on medical grounds and cancelled a series of planned engagements, including hosting world leaders at the UN Climate Change Summit in November. British Prime Minister last Sunday wished Queen Elizabeth II a rapid recovery after the 95-year-old monarch tested positive for COVID-19 a fortnight after marking 70 years on the throne. I'm sure I speak for everyone in wishing Her Majesty the Queen a swift recovery from COVID and a rapid return to vibrant good health, he said on Twitter. Her appearances since then have been rare, although she returned to public duties before the start of her record-breaking 70th year as monarch on February 6. News of her illness came the day before Johnson announced all pandemic legal curbs in England would end on Thursday. On Monday, Johnson said compulsory self-isolation for positive cases would stop on Thursday, urging a shift from government intervention to personal responsibility. Most recently, Her Majesty has cancelled 2 engagements due for Thursday after she tested positive for coronavirus at the weekend, Buckingham Palace announced. The 2 virtual audiences that have had previously been scheduled to take place today will now be rescheduled for a later date. A spokesman said the 95-year-old head of state was continuing with light duties, he added. Back to you, Alma.
Well, we all wish Her Majesty well and hope she gets well soon. Thank you very much, Ryan, for that update.
Thank you, Alma. Reporting from the United Kingdom, I'm Ryan Florentino, and we live in interesting times.
Meanwhile, Hong Kong's government invoked emergency powers today to allow doctors, nurses, and other personnel from the Chinese mainland to help combat a spiraling COVID outbreak. The densely populated metropolis is in the throes of its worst ever COVID wave, registering thousands of cases every day, overwhelming hospitals and government efforts to isolate all infected people in dedicated units. Let's listen in.
我對佢哋團隊嘅意見覺得非常之正面啊，因為我覺得有團隊落嚟嘅時候咧，可以俾我哋一啲信心，咁所以可能真係需要中央嗰方面嘅支持，或者提供一啲物資上嘅協助。咁有透過呢啲咁物資上協助嘅時候，亦都理解埋佢哋應該可以點樣可以減低啲重症嘅話，我覺得對於香港市民嚟講，呢個係一個好重要嘅信息咯。
Now, Chinese mainland medics are not currently allowed to operate in Hong Kong without passing local exams and licensing regulations. The emergency powers exempts certain persons or projects from all relevant statutory requirements so as to increase Hong Kong's epidemic control capacity for containing the 5th wave within a short period of time, according to the statement. And this move came after Chinese Premier Xi Jinping last week ordered Hong Kong to take all necessary means to bring the outbreak under control, signaling Hong Kong would not be allowed to move towards living with the virus like much of the rest of the world. Allowing Chinese mainland medics to work in Hong Kong has been a source of debate for years. Even before the pandemic, supporters argued it could alleviate shortages in the city's overstretched healthcare system. Local media practitioners in the past have objected, citing issues such as language and cultural barriers, though critics have dismissed such talk as protectionism. Hong Kong has recorded more than 62,000 COVID cases in the current wave, compared with just 12,000 during the 2 years before. Health experts fear the real number is far higher because of a testing backlog and people avoiding testing for fear of being forced into isolation units if they are found positive. Around 1,200 healthcare workers have been infected as of Wednesday, according to hospital authority. Meanwhile, Hong Kong began implementing a vaccine pass system to restaurants, shopping malls, supermarkets, and other establishments today. Residents are required to be vaccinated in order to enter the affected premises, and scanning of the controversial contact tracing Leave Home Safe app becomes mandatory. The densely populated metropolis is in the throes of its worst ever COVID wave. It's now registering thousands of cases every day. It's now overwhelming hospitals and government efforts to isolate all infected people in dedicated units. And the Philippines now is better off prepared to exit the COVID-19 pandemic, according to vaccine expert panel member Dr. Ron Jean Solante. Let's listen in.
So, kumbaga, in short, mukhang ready na ang NCR for the alert level 1. Now, it doesn't also mean na pag nagluluwag tayo, mas lala tayong complacent sa mga ginagawa natin. Kung magluluwag tayo, we need to also protect ourselves. Now, it's now the important part here na kung nagluluwag tayo, panatiliin natin yung mga ginagawa natin, yung pag-follow ng health protocol. So, in short, I have no problem if alert level 1 will be. We will now be transitioning to alert level 1, especially in the NCR. Pero tuloy pa rin ang bakunahan, tuloy pa rin ang health protocol, at tuloy pa rin ang pag-monitor sa mga kaso. Yes, I think we are on that process now. Our mindset is hopefully we can be exiting with this pandemic. We can exit with this pandemic. At paka-importante ang pagkaso, because this is an important indicator na once we had lower na yung cases natin, we can deal with the virus. We know how to deal with it. And I think isa sa mga punto natin dito is we also have available antiviral agents that are appropriate against this infection. We have oral antivirals, we have IV antivirals. Our healthcare facilities are already equipped with how to deal with severe COVID. So for me, we are better off prepared now compared to 2 years ago or 1 year ago.
The government has deliberated the country's exit plan from COVID-19 pandemic and now crafting a strategic roadmap to the new normal. The roadmap is set to be presented to President Duterte early this month, March. Solante said the public should always be reminded of the vaccine benefits, especially with the presence of the highly transmissible Omicron variant in the country. And Taiwan today announced plans to reopen to business travelers and shorten quarantine for all arrivals, slightly loosening restrictions in one of the few places alongside China still pursuing a zero-COVID strategy. Taiwan's Central Epidemic Command Center said Thursday restrictions would ease beginning early March for foreigners coming in for business purposes, including inspection, investment, employment, or fulfilling contractual obligations. Chinese, Hong Kong, and Macau residents can only apply for entry to fulfill business contracts or due to transferals within multinational companies. Business visitors have to apply in person with Taiwan's de facto embassies, while Chinese nationals must apply online via local host companies to the National Immigration Agency. Also from March 7, the 14-day mandatory quarantine for all arrivals will be cut to 10 days, in addition to a week of monitoring at home. The island was hailed for keeping COVID-19 at bay for the first year of the pandemic, but an outbreak detected last April forced Taipei to implement economically painful restrictions. And that included banning all foreign visitors, with the exception of a few categories such as residency holders and diplomats, since a surge in local infections last May. And Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau revoked emergency powers used to dislodge trucker-led protests against COVID restrictions as he declared the crisis is over. Here is Thomas I. Likeness from our EBC Canada Bureau. Thomas.
We are confident that existing laws and bylaws are now sufficient to keep people safe.
And with that, Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau revoked the Emergency Act. He just declared it a little over a week ago. Protesters opposed to COVID-19 restrictions had been occupying downtown Ottawa for more than 3 weeks, and that prompted the government to act. But now Trudeau says that has changed.
After careful consideration, we're ready to confirm that the situation is no longer an emergency. Therefore, the federal government will be ending the use of the Emergencies Act.
Trudeau had faced criticism for bringing in the measure. It's the first time the act had been invoked since its inception in 1988. Now, these recent measures had been set to expire in the middle of March, but the government on Wednesday decided to end them early. The measures gave the government power to prevent online fundraisers from giving money to the protesters by freezing the bank accounts of organizers. It also gave police the power to designate no-go zones. These were created around critical areas such as border crossings, bridges, and the Parliament buildings. Last weekend, a large-scale police operation cleared the bulk of protesters who were camped out in downtown Ottawa. But there's still a heavy police presence in the area, and checkpoints have been set up to keep the demonstrators away. Thomas I. Likeness, Eagle News International.
Thank you, Thomas. Meanwhile, however, in the United States, hundreds of truckers and their supporters set off from Southern California on a convoy headed towards the capital, Washington, to protest against pandemic restrictions. Again, let's listen in.
We are currently protesting the states of emergency that have been put out there and hoping to end all mandates, mask and vaccine, both for all federal employees, healthcare workers, and Department of Defense military personnel. We want to end. There's no emergency anymore. The emergency's over with, and so ending the the emergency declaration, the state of emergency, ending the mandates, and let's get back to normal. It's time. It's time that we go back to work. It's time that we go back to our normal life.
It's not necessarily something to deliver once I get there. It's that our country needs to get united. Everybody. Doesn't matter what walk of life you're from. Everybody needs to unite. It's got nothing to do with actually getting to D.C. and delivering a message to the government. The message will be delivered all the next 11 days.
The caravan, which began Wednesday as a few dozen vehicles, was expected to take 11 days to get to Washington, D.C. area, arriving on March 5, though organizers say they don't intend to enter the city itself. And that assurance has not prevented the mobilization of 700 National Guard to provide added security around the nation's capital as authorities fret over a possible repeat of the January 6, 2021 invasion of Congress by supporters of former President Donald Trump. Pentagon spokesman John Kirby said guardsmen would not be armed, would not be empowered to arrest people, but would be reporting wrongdoing to local police. A number of large vehicles, including snowplows and garbage trucks, have been deployed on the streets of the capital to prevent access to sensitive sites. Meanwhile, rescuers in Madagascar began to assess the damage caused by Cyclone Emnati, which overnight lashed the island nation, still reeling from the impact of another cyclone earlier this month. Now, no casualties has yet been reported, but houses were submerged in brown water, debris, and uprooted trees, according to an AFP correspondent who saw this, as the weather conditions prevented rescuers from carrying out thorough searches in the worst affected areas in the south and the southeast. Emnati made landfall around 2300 GMT just north of the southeastern district of Manakara. The storm, which passed just north of the Indian Ocean islands of Mauritius and Reunion, had weakened slightly by the time it reached the eastern coast of Madagascar. But it was still packing winds of around 100 kilometers per hour and gusts of 140 kilometers per hour, according to Meteo France. Meteo France has warned that another tropical storm may form in the next 5 days. UN agency said on Tuesday they were preparing for the worst. Another storm, Cyclone Batsirai, struck the island last February 5, affecting some 270,000 people and claiming 121 lives. At the same time, some 21,000 people remain displaced from when Tropical Storm Anna struck in late January. Another 5,000 were affected last week by Tropical Storm Dumako. More than 37,000 people have been moved to emergency shelters as a precautionary measure. The number of major wildfires worldwide will rise sharply in coming decades due to global warming, and governments are ill-prepared for the death and destruction such mega blazes trail in their wake, according to the United Nations, warning that today, even the most ambitious efforts to curb greenhouse gas emissions will not prevent a dramatic surge in the frequency of extreme fire conditions. The report commissioned by the UN Environment Program, or UNEP, concluded by the end of the century, the probability of wildfire events similar to Australia's 2019 to 2020 Black Summer or the huge Arctic fires in 2020 occurring in a given year is likely to increase by 31 to 57%, it said. The heating of the planet is turning landscapes into tinder boxes, and more extreme weather means stronger, hotter, and drier winds to fan the flames. The recent study in The Lancet concluded that exposure to wildfire smoke results on average in more than 30,000 deaths each year across 43 nations, for which data was available. Economic damage in the U.S., one of the few countries to calculate such costs, have varied between $71 to $348 billion in recent years, according to an assessment cited in the report. And Mount Etna, one of the world's most active volcanoes, belched smoke and ashes in a new eruption on Monday, briefly forcing the closure of the airport of Catania in Sicily. An ash cloud rose 10 kilometers into the air above a crater on the southeast of the volcano, according to the INGV, National Institute for Geophysics and Volcanology, on Twitter. Ash-covered roads, balconies, and the roofs of towns nearby, according to Italy's Civil Protection Agency. The INGV said it had recorded a gradual rise in volcanic seismic tremor induced by escaping gases, which could be a sign Etna is heading towards another spectacular burst of fiery lava fountaining known as paroxysmal activity. At 3,324 meters, Etna is the tallest active volcano in Europe and has erupted frequently in the past 500,000 years. And finally, in our news, Church of Christ members in the picturesque island nation of the Maldives held a coastal cleanup drive. To tell us more, here's Steffi Dewan. Steph.
To help in maintaining the cleanliness of the beach here in Maldives, members of the Iglesia ni Cristo were gathered in Bilingili Island to reach this objective. Under the INC program and with the cooperation of FYM Foundation, volunteers from different areas of Maldives woke up early to go to Bilingili Island to conclude a coastal cleanup drive activity. Bilingili Island is just around 10 minutes away from the capital, Male. This island is in the North Male Atoll and is administratively known as Bilibale and considered the 5th district of Male, Maldives. It lies about 2 kilometers west of Male Island and is reachable by a local ferry service that operates 24 hours between Male and Bilibale. And according to the volunteers, this coastal cleanup drive is very relevant nowadays to maintain the cleanliness, as Maldives is starting to welcome more foreign visitors in the upcoming time. And indeed, this activity of members of the Iglesia ni Cristo helped in campaigning environmental cleanliness.
Reporting from Maldives, this is Steffi Dewan, and we live in interesting times.
Thank you, Steph. As always, I'll end the day on a thoughtful note. Our ability to look back and smile at our past is proof that God's plan is to keep us moving forward. This has been Eagle News International. I'm Alma Angeles. Stay alert and stay informed because we live in interesting times. Good night.